No mattress, no blankets, just a pile of reeds, a stone floor, and your aching limbs. In ancient Sparta, boys were stripped of comfort and even clothes at the age of 7. Their beds were thorns, their meals were stolen, and kindness was considered weakness. Tonight, slip under your own warm blanket as we travel to a cold stone barrack where survival meant silence, obedience, and shivering through the night. If stories like this help you appreciate the softness of your pillow, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. And tell me in the comments, would you have lasted a week in a Spartan training camp? You are 7 years old, and today your childhood ends forever. The morning sun barely crests the rocky hills of Laconia when the older boys arrive at your family's modest dwelling. Your mother doesn't weep, she cannot, for showing such emotion, would bring shame upon your house. Instead, she watches with the stoic expression that every Spartan woman must master as you are led away to begin the education system that will either forge you into one of history's most feared warriors or break you entirely. The walk to the communal barracks feels longer than the journey to Mount Taygetus, where weak infants are left to die. Your bare feet, already toughened by years of running across the sharp stones of Sparta, carry you toward a life that will make those early hardships seem like gentle caresses. The older boys who escort you speak little, but their presence tells you everything you need to know about what awaits. Their bodies are lean to the point of gauntness, their skin bears the marks of countless beatings and training accidents, and their eyes hold a watchfulness that belongs more to wild animals than to children. The barracks themselves are nothing like the modest comfort of your family home. Constructed of rough-hewn stone with timber framing, these long, rectangular buildings house dozens of boys ranging from your age to 20 years old. The walls are thick enough to provide some protection from Sparta's harsh winters, but thin enough that every sound carries throughout the structure. There are no windows as you might recognize them, only narrow slits high in the walls that allow minimal light and air to enter while preventing easy escape or outside contact. Inside, the first thing that strikes you is the smell. It's a mixture of unwashed bodies cooking food of questionable quality, damp wool, and something else, something that might be fear, or perhaps the lingering scent of violence. The floor is packed earth covered with scattered rushes that are changed infrequently. Along the walls, wooden platforms serve as sleeping areas, but you quickly learn that the concept of personal space is as foreign here as luxury or comfort. Your sleeping arrangement consists of nothing more than a thin woolen cloak, the single piece of clothing you will own for the next several years. This serves as your blanket, your pillow, your protection from rain, and occasionally your only source of warmth. The wooden platforms are bare, offering no cushioning between your young body and the hard surface beneath. During winter, frost forms on the interior walls, and your breath creates small clouds in the frigid air. The older boys tell stories of companions who didn't wake up during the coldest nights, their bodies found stiff and blue in the morning. The daily routine begins before dawn, when a horn sounds throughout the barracks. There is no gradual awakening, no moment to gather your thoughts or prepare for the day ahead. You spring from your platform immediately, for hesitation results in a beating from the older boys who serve as your direct supervisors. These teenage authorities, called, carry whips and use them liberally. They have learned cruelty not as a vice, but as a necessary tool for survival, and they apply it with the same methodical precision that they use for their weapons training. Breakfast, when it comes at all, consists of a thin gruel made from barley, often mixed with blood and vinegar to create the infamous black broth that even adult Spartan warriors find barely palatable. The portions are deliberately insufficient. You are meant to be hungry, constantly, gnawingly hungry. This chronic malnourishment serves multiple purposes in the Spartan system. It keeps you lean and quick, eliminates any softness that might impede your physical development, and most importantly, it teaches you to view food not as a pleasure but as fuel to be obtained by any means necessary. The inadequate rations create a curious dynamic within the barracks. Stealing food is not only permitted but actively encouraged, provided you don't get caught. This creates a constant state of vigilance among the boys. You learn to eat quickly, to hide any extra portions you might acquire, and to sleep with one eye open lest someone attempt to take what little you have. The older boys, with years of experience in these survival tactics, become expert thieves, capable of taking food from the kitchens, nearby farms, or even from the homes of full citizens, without detection. Getting caught, however, brings severe punishment, not for the theft itself that shows initiative and cunning that the Spartans value, but for the clumsiness of being discovered. The beatings that follow such failures are administered with systematic precision. You are stripped naked and whipped with a special rod called a while the other boys watch in silence. Some boys die during these beatings, their bodies unable to withstand the trauma. Their deaths serve as lessons to the survivors about the price of failure in Spartan society. The physical training begins immediately after the morning meal. Your day consists of endless exercises designed to build endurance, strength, and pain tolerance. You run across rocky terrain until your feet bleed, wrestle with boys larger and older than yourself, and practice fighting techniques with wooden weapons until your hands are raw with blisters. The trainers show no mercy for your age or size. If you cannot keep up, you are beaten. If you cry, you are beaten more severely. If you show fear, you become a target for additional punishment. The psychological aspects of the training are perhaps even more brutal than the physical ones. You are deliberately isolated from any source of comfort or emotional support. Contact with your family is forbidden. The older boys are trained to show no kindness or sympathy. Any display of gentleness is seen as weakness and punished accordingly. You learn to suppress any emotional response to pain, fear, or loneliness. The goal is to create young men who view such feelings as foreign and dangerous luxuries. During the long winter months, the cold becomes a constant enemy. The barracks provide minimal heating, a single fire pit in the center of the main room that barely warms those fortunate enough to sleep near it. You learn to fight for position near the fire, but you also learn that such comfort comes at a price. The boys who control the warm sleeping spots demand tribute, extra food, completion of their chores, or submission to various forms of humiliation. The social hierarchy within the barracks is brutal and constantly shifting, determined by a combination of physical strength, cunning, and sheer willpower. Your single cloak becomes both lifeline and symbol of your degradation. During the day, it serves as minimal protection from the elements during outdoor training. At night, you wrap yourself in it as tightly as possible, trying to trap whatever body heat you can generate. But the wool is rough and thin, providing little actual warmth. On the coldest nights, boys huddle together for warmth, though such cooperation is officially discouraged as a sign of weakness. Those who freeze alone are considered stronger than those who seek the comfort of shared body heat. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance adds another layer to your misery. The older boys watch your every move, looking for signs of weakness, rebellion, or any behavior that deviates from the harsh norms of the agog. They report infractions to the adult supervisors, who view brutality not as cruelty but as necessary education. Your every action is scrutinized, your every word weighed for signs of softness or civilian thinking. Privacy becomes a concept as foreign as comfort, and you learn to guard your thoughts as carefully as you guard your meager possessions. As the months pass, you begin to understand that this is not temporary suffering with an end point, but rather your new, permanent reality. The boys who have been in the system longer speak of it lasting until their 20th birthday, 13 more years of this existence. Some whisper that even after graduation to full citizenship, Spartan men continue to live in communal barracks until they are 30, eating the same institutional meals and sleeping on the same hard platforms. The question that haunts your nights as you lie shivering on your wooden platform with only your thin cloak for comfort is not whether you can endure this treatment. Endurance is not optional in Sparta. The question is whether any part of the child you were this morning will survive to see manhood, or whether the system will succeed in its goal of transforming you into something harder, colder, and more dangerous than human. By your 10th year, in the barracks, your body has become a map of the Agoge's lessons. Scars trace across your back from countless beatings. Your knuckles are permanently swollen from bare-knuckle fighting practice, and your feet have developed calluses thick enough to walk across broken pottery without flinching. The thin boy who was dragged from his mother's home 3 years ago has vanished, replaced by something leaner, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Yet this physical transformation, brutal as it has been, pales in comparison to the psychological reconstruction that the Spartan system has performed upon your mind. The concept of individual comfort has been systematically purged from your consciousness. You no longer think in terms of warm or cold, hungry or satisfied, comfortable or uncomfortable. These have become meaningless distinctions in a world where such considerations are not only irrelevant, but actively dangerous. To show discomfort is to show weakness, and weakness in the Agoge is met with violence so swift and severe that you learn to suppress even the internal recognition of physical suffering. Your sleeping arrangements have evolved into a complex hierarchy of survival. The wooden platforms along the barracks walls have become territories to be conquered and defended. The newest arrivals, 7-year-old boys who remind you of your former self, sleep on the floor between the platforms, curled up like dogs seeking whatever warmth they can find from the bodies above them. Those who have survived a year or more earn the right to a space on the actual platforms, though these are claimed through a combination of physical dominance, political alliances with older boys, and demonstration of useful skills. The single cloak that serves as your only possession has become an extension of your body. After 3 years, the original wool has been patched so many times with scraps stolen or earned that it resembles a patchwork testament to your survival skills. You have learned to sleep wrapped in it so tightly that loosening yourself requires several minutes of careful unwinding, a technique that conserves body heat but leaves you vulnerable if you need to respond quickly to threats or commands. On the coldest nights, when frost covers the interior walls and your breath freezes in the air, you sometimes wake to find that your cloak has frozen to the wooden platform beneath you. The inadequate food rations continue to shape every aspect of daily life. The thin barley gruel served at dawn barely fills your stomach, and by midday, the gnawing hunger has become a constant background sensation, like the ache of an old wound. You have learned to identify which of the kitchen slaves might be bribed or threatened into providing extra portions, which local farmers leave their fields unguarded at predictable times, and which houses in the surrounding area store food in easily accessible locations. Your thievery skills have developed to a level that would impress professional criminals in other Greek cities. You can move through a house in complete darkness, locate food stores by smell alone, and extract provisions without disturbing sleeping inhabitants. The other boys have become equally accomplished, turning every meal into a complex negotiation of stolen goods, traded services, and temporary alliances. Those who prove unsuccessful at supplementing their rations grow visibly weaker, their training performance suffers, and they become targets for the stronger boys who view them as evolutionary dead ends. The punishments for being caught stealing have escalated as you've grown older. The simple beatings of your early years have been replaced by more sophisticated torments designed to test your pain tolerance and mental resilience. You have watched boys your age beaten so severely that they required days to recover, then forced to resume full training schedules while their wounds were still fresh. The adult supervisors explain these beatings as educational experiences, teaching lessons about stealth, planning, and the consequences of failure that will serve you well in warfare. Winter in the barracks has become a season of systematic suffering that tests the limits of human endurance. The single fire pit in the center of the main room provides heat for perhaps 6 boys at most, while the remaining dozens must find other ways to survive the freezing temperatures. You have learned to recognize the signs of fatal cold in other boys, the bluish tinge to lips and fingernails, the uncontrollable shivering that progresses to stillness, the confusion and disorientation that precedes unconsciousness. Some mornings the older boys collect the bodies of those who didn't survive the night, carrying them out with the same casual efficiency used for removing trash. The social dynamics within the barracks have evolved into a complex ecosystem of dominance, submission, and strategic alliance. The oldest boys, those approaching their 20th birthday and graduation from the Agog, hold absolute power over the younger inhabitants. They control access to the fire, determine sleeping arrangements, distribute what little extra food might be available, and serve as judges in disputes between younger boys. Their word is law, and their justice is swift and brutal. These older boys have themselves been shaped by years of the same treatment you now endure. They show no mercy because mercy was never shown to them. They view kindness as a luxury that Sparta cannot afford and compassion as a weakness that must be eliminated. Their treatment of younger boys is not sadistic, it is educational, designed to prepare you for a world where enemies will show no quarter and survival depends on absolute hardness of spirit. Your education extends far beyond simple military training. You are taught to read and write, though the curriculum focuses heavily on military histories, tactical manuals, and the poetry of warriors. Mathematics lessons center on calculating supplies, distances, and troop movements. Geography is studied through the lens of strategic advantage and defensive positioning. Every subject is filtered through the singular focus of creating perfect soldiers who can think as well as fight. The physical training has intensified as your body has matured. The simple running and wrestling of your early years has been replaced by complex military exercises that replicate battlefield conditions. You practice fighting while exhausted, wounded, and outnumbered. You learn to use every weapon in the Spartan arsenal, from the traditional spear and shield combination to specialized tools for siege warfare. The training is conducted regardless of weather. You fight in rain, snow, and blazing heat, learning to adapt your techniques to any environmental condition. The psychological conditioning has become more sophisticated as well. You are placed in situations designed to test your loyalty to Sparta over personal bonds. Boys who become too close are deliberately separated. Those who show excessive emotion are subjected to treatments designed to break their attachment to such feelings. You learn to view other people, even fellow Spartans, as either assets or threats, to be evaluated based purely on their utility to the state. The isolation from family continues to be absolute. You have not seen your parents since the day you entered the barracks, and their faces have begun to fade from your memory. This is not accidental. The Agog is designed to replace family bonds with loyalty to your fellow soldiers and to Sparta itself. Your true family is now the other boys, who share your suffering, though even these relationships are carefully managed to prevent the development of loyalty that might conflict with state interests. As you approach your 15th birthday, you begin to understand that the worst aspects of your training are still ahead. The older boys speak in whispers of the secret police force that the most promising Agog graduates are invited to join. They tell stories of missions into the countryside to hunt and kill helots, the enslaved population that serves Sparta, in order to prevent uprisings and demonstrate their complete commitment to the state's security. These killings are presented not as murder but as advanced training exercises, necessary practice for the ultimate mission of every Spartan warrior. The constant exposure to violence has rewired your emotional responses in ways that would horrify the civilians of other Greek cities. You no longer flinch at the sight of blood or the sound of bones breaking. The screams of boys being beaten or worse have become background noise, no more disturbing than the sound of wind through the barracks roof. You have learned to inflict pain efficiently and without emotional involvement, viewing it as simply another skill to be mastered like swordwork or spear throwing. Yet despite this systematic dehumanization, something within you continues to observe and remember. Perhaps it is the part of your mind that the agogy has not yet managed to reach, or perhaps it is simply the human capacity for adaptation expressing itself in unexpected ways. You find yourself wondering what kind of men emerge from this system, what kind of society requires such brutal preparation of its children, and whether the strength that Sparta seeks to create might itself contain the seeds of its eventual destruction. But these thoughts remain carefully hidden, buried beneath layers of conditioning and survival instinct. To voice such questions would be to invite punishment so severe that death might be preferable. Instead, you focus on the immediate challenges of each day, finding enough food to maintain your strength, avoiding the attention of those looking for targets to abuse, and gradually building the skills and reputation that might eventually earn you a position of relative safety within the barracks hierarchy. The question that haunts your few quiet moments is no longer whether you can survive. The Agog survival has become your entire existence. The question now is what you will become when you finally emerge from this crucible, and whether the man who walks out of these barracks will bear any resemblance to the child who was brought here so many years ago. At 17, you have become something that exists in the space between human and weapon, a creature forged by systematic brutality into an instrument of Spartan will. The boy who once cried for his mother has been so thoroughly reconstructed that the memory feels like a story told about someone else. Your body, now fully grown but lean as a hunting hound, bears the permanent marks of a decade in the Agog, scars that map every lesson learned, every weakness purged, every moment when the system's harsh education carved itself into your flesh. These two barracks around you have changed little in the 10 years since your arrival, yet your perception of them has undergone a complete transformation. The same stone walls, wooden platforms, and single fire pit that once seemed like instruments of torture now feel like the foundational elements of your identity. This place of suffering has become home in a way that your childhood dwelling never was, because it has shaped you in ways that comfort never could. Your sleeping arrangements have evolved into a position of relative privilege earned through a decade of survival. As one of the older boys approaching graduation, you control access to one of the better sleeping spots near the fire pit. Younger boys compete for the privilege of serving you, hoping to gain protection from the harsh treatment that you yourself once endured. The thin woolen cloak that was once your only possession has been supplemented by additional layers earned through various means, some given as rewards for exceptional performance, others taken from boys who no longer needed them. The social hierarchy within the barracks now places you near its apex, with only the 18 and 19-year-olds holding authority over you. This position brings both privileges and responsibilities that would have been incomprehensible to your younger self. You are expected to help train the newest arrivals, teaching them through the same methods that shaped you: violence, deprivation, and constant pressure. When you beat a 7-year-old boy for showing weakness, you do so not from cruelty but from a genuine belief that such treatment is necessary for his survival. The food situation has improved marginally as you've proven your worth within the system. The strongest and most capable boys receive slightly larger portions, and your skill at obtaining supplementary nutrition through theft and intimidation has reached professional levels. You can assess a potential target's defenses at a glance, plan complex raids on food stores, and execute these operations with a precision that would impress military commanders. Yet hunger remains a constant companion, a deliberate feature of the system rather than an accident of poor planning. Your understanding of the Agogi's purpose has deepened as you've matured within it. The harsh conditions, the isolation, the constant violence, all of it serves the specific goal of creating soldiers who view normal human comforts as foreign luxuries. A Spartan warrior who has never slept in a soft bed will not be weakened by sleeping on rocky ground during a campaign. A man who has been hungry since childhood will not be broken by short rations during a siege. A person who has learned to endure any physical pain without complaint will not surrender when wounded in battle. The psychological conditioning has progressed to its final stages. You have learned to compartmentalize emotions so completely that you can watch a friend die without expression, then continue with your assigned tasks as if nothing had happened. This is not callousness, it is professional necessity. Spartan. Soldiers who allow grief or fear to affect their performance endanger not only themselves but their entire unit. The Agog has taught you to feel such emotions, process them internally, and then set them aside in favor of more practical considerations. Your training has evolved beyond simple physical conditioning to encompass the full range of skills required for military leadership. You study logistics, understanding how to calculate supply requirements for different types of campaigns. You learn engineering, focusing on the construction and destruction of fortifications. Your weapons training has progressed to include not just individual combat but complex unit tactics that require precise coordination with other soldiers. Every lesson is practical, focused on skills that will be immediately useful in warfare. The relationship between older and younger boys in the barracks serves as preparation for the military chain of command that will define your adult life. You have learned to give orders that will be obeyed without question, and to obey orders from your superiors with the same absolute compliance. The concept of individual initiative exists only within carefully defined parameters. You are expected to show creativity and resourcefulness in achieving assigned objectives, but never to question the objectives themselves. The Crypteia, the secret police force composed of the most promising Agogi graduates, has begun to recruit from your age group. Several of your companions have been selected for this honor, disappearing from the barracks for weeks at a time before returning with a new hardness in their eyes and fresh scars on their bodies. They speak little of their activities, but the younger boys whisper stories of midnight raids on helot settlements, of individual hunting expeditions designed to test stealth and killing skills, of psychological operations meant to maintain fear among Sparta's enslaved population. Your own selection for the Crypteia seems likely, based on your performance evaluations and the subtle attention you've received from the adult supervisors. This prospect fills you with a complex mixture of pride and something that might once have been called apprehension, though you have learned to reframe such feelings as anticipation for the opportunity to prove your worth to the state. The Crypteia represents the culmination of Agogi training, the transformation from student of violence to practitioner of it in service to Sparta. The approaching end of your formal education brings with it the realization that graduation from the agog is not an escape from its conditions, but rather a transition to their permanent application. Adult Spartan warriors continue to live in communal barracks until age 30, eating the same institutional meals and sleeping on similar hard platforms. The harsh conditions of your childhood are not temporary suffering, but preparation for a lifetime of disciplined austerity. Your body has been transformed into a precision instrument optimized for warfare. Every muscle has been developed for specific military applications. Your reflexes have been honed through countless hours of combat training. Your pain tolerance has been elevated to levels that would seem superhuman to civilians from other Greek cities. Yet this physical transformation is merely the visible expression of deeper changes that have occurred at the level of fundamental identity. The question of who you were before the agog has become meaningless. That child's personality, preferences, fears, and dreams have been systematically identified and eliminated as incompatible with Spartan requirements. What remains is a consciousness perfectly aligned with state objectives, capable of extraordinary performance in military situations, but fundamentally incapable of the kind of individual self-interest that characterizes normal human psychology. Your graduation ceremony, when it comes, will be a quiet affair, a simple acknowledgement that you have successfully completed the transformation from child to weapon. There will be no celebration, no recognition of the extraordinary suffering you have endured, no acknowledgement of the humanity that was sacrificed to create your current capabilities. Such sentimentality would be viewed as weakness, incompatible with the efficiency-focused culture that has shaped you. As you prepare for the final phase of your education and the transition to active military service, you sometimes find yourself observing the newest arrivals to the barracks, 7-year-old boys torn from their families and thrust into the same systematic brutality that forged you. Their tears and confusion remind you of something that might once have been empathy, though you have learned to interpret such responses as evidence of their need for the corrective treatment that awaits them. The Spartan system has succeeded in its primary objective. It has created in you a soldier of exceptional capability, utterly loyal to the state and completely dedicated to military excellence. Whether it has created a human being in any meaningful sense of that term is a question that you lack the conceptual framework to even consider. That framework, along with the child who possessed it, was consumed long ago in the fires of the agog, transformed into the raw material from which Spartan warriors are made. The long nights in the barracks, listening to the breathing of dozens of other young men who have undergone the same transformation, sometimes bring moments of something that resembles contemplation. But these thoughts, when they come, focus not on the past or on alternative possibilities, but on the future campaigns that await you and the battles where you will finally justify the investment that Sparta has made in your creation. The leather tent flap closes behind you with a sound like a death sentence, trapping you inside 3 square meters of space with 7 other men who will become closer to you than family, more essential to your survival than food or water, and quite possibly the last human faces you will ever see. Welcome to the basic 8-man unit of the Roman legions, where privacy is a forgotten luxury, and personal space is measured in inches rather than feet. You are Marcus, a 20-year-old farmer's son from a small settlement outside Rome, and 6 months ago you thought you understood hardship. The calluses on your hands from working your family's modest plot, the ache in your back from long days bent over crops, the simple meals of bread and vegetables that sometimes stretched thin during bad harvests, these seemed like genuine struggles then. Now, as you survey your new living situation, those memories feel like dreams of paradise recalled by a man in hell. The tent itself represents the pinnacle of Roman military engineering applied to the problem of housing soldiers in the field, which is to say that it achieves maximum efficiency at the complete expense of comfort or dignity. Constructed of leather panels sewn together with military precision, it measures approximately 10 feet by 10 feet at its base, with sloping sides that reduce the interior space considerably. The peak height allows a tall man to stand upright in the center, but anywhere else requires a permanent crouch that will, over time, reshape your spine into the curved posture of a career legionnaire. 8 men live in this space. 8 full-grown Roman soldiers with their equipment, personal belongings, rations, and all the biological functions that human beings cannot suppress even under military discipline. The mathematics of the situation are grimly simple. Each man has roughly 1 square meter of floor space to call his own, an area smaller than many livestock pens and considerably less private. Your 7 tent mates represent a cross-section of the Roman world drawn together by the great leveling force of military service. There is Gaius, a blacksmith's son from Gaul whose massive frame seems designed to make the tent feel even smaller than it is. Quintus, a former merchant from Seats or Hispania, brings a nervous energy and a tendency to mutter in his sleep that will prove maddening during the long nights ahead. Lucius, barely 18 and trying to grow his first proper beard, hails from a patrician family fallen on hard times. His refined manners and educated speech mark him as different from the others, a difference that military life will either erase or exploit. The sleeping arrangements follow a strict protocol developed through generations of Roman military experience. Each man's sleeping position is assigned based on seniority, with the most experienced soldier claiming the spot nearest the tent's entrance, a position that offers both the advantage of first access to the outside and the responsibility of responding to any nighttime emergencies. The newest recruits, including yourself, sleep toward the back of the tent, where the sloping walls create cramped quarters and the air grows thick with the accumulated breath and body heat of 8 men. Your bedding consists of a single woolen cloak, the sagum, which serves as mattress, blanket, and pillow combined. Laid directly on the ground, it provides minimal cushioning against the rocks, roots, and frozen earth that characterize most Roman camps. During winter campaigns, this thin layer of wool becomes the only barrier between your body and ground that may be frozen solid. Veterans learn to place their equipment strategically around their sleeping area, using shields as windbreaks and packs as additional insulation, but such techniques must be learned through bitter experience. The tent offers no privacy for any bodily function. When nature calls during the night, you must navigate carefully around the sleeping forms of your tent mates, trying not to step on anyone while making your way to the tent flap. This process becomes particularly challenging during winter when leaving the relative warmth of the tent for even a few minutes can result in dangerous exposure. Many soldiers develop the ability to suppress their biological needs for extended periods, a skill that proves useful during long marches and siege situations but exacts a toll on health over time. Personal hygiene becomes a group activity by necessity. The small basin used for washing must serve all 8 men, with water that becomes progressively dirtier as it moves down the chain of seniority. By the time the newest recruits have their turn, the water often resembles mud more than anything suitable for cleaning. During active campaigns, water for washing is a luxury that may be unavailable for weeks at a time, leading to conditions that would horrify civilians but become simply another aspect of military life. The smell inside the tent defies description to anyone who has not experienced it firsthand. 8 unwashed male bodies, leather equipment that has been soaked and dried countless times, wool clothing that has absorbed months of sweat and grime, and the lingering odors of whatever food rations have been consumed. All of this combines into an atmosphere that is both overwhelming to newcomers and eventually unnoticeable to veterans. Your sense of smell adapts within a few weeks, though returning to civilian life later requires a similar readjustment period. Food storage and preparation present constant challenges in the confined space. Each contubernium receives rations of grain, salt pork, olive oil, and wine that must be stored within the tent to prevent theft by other units. These supplies take up precious space that is already at a premium, forcing creative solutions that typically involve hanging bags from the tent's support poles and stacking containers in any available corner. The grain must be ground into flour, using hand mills, a process that produces fine dust that settles on everything and everyone inside the tent. Cooking is done outside when possible, but weather conditions often force meal preparation inside the tent. The smoke from cooking fires has no proper outlet, creating an atmosphere that stings the eyes and irritates the throat. Burns from cooking equipment are common, and in the confined space, an accident that spills boiling water or oil can injure multiple men simultaneously. The tent's leather walls retain the smoke and cooking odors, adding to the complex bouquet of smells that characterizes your new home. The social dynamics within the contubernium develop quickly and with an intensity born of absolute interdependence. These 7 men become your most intimate companions, not through choice but through necessity. You will know their sleeping patterns, their personal hygiene habits, their fears and complaints, their physical ailments and mental peculiarities in greater detail than you know those of your own family members. This forced intimacy can create bonds of brotherhood stronger than blood relationships, but it can also generate hatreds and resentments that simmer for years. Arguments are inevitable. When 8 men live in such close quarters under constant stress, disputes over sleeping space, food distribution, personal belongings, and 1,000 other small matters can escalate quickly in an environment where escape is impossible. Roman military discipline provides mechanisms for resolving such conflicts, but these solutions typically involve physical punishment for all parties involved, regardless of who was actually at fault. This creates pressure for the group to police itself and resolve disputes internally before they attract official attention. The equipment that each soldier must maintain takes up a significant portion of the available space. Your shield, sword, javelin, armor, and pack must be stored within the tent along with those of your 7 companions. Roman military regulations require that all equipment be kept in perfect condition, which means regular cleaning, oiling, and repair work that must be done inside the tent during bad weather. The constant maintenance creates a background noise of scraping, polishing, and hammering that continues from dawn until late evening. Sleep, when it comes, is frequently interrupted. 8 men sleeping in close proximity creates a symphony of snoring, coughing, muttering, and movement that takes considerable adaptation. Some soldiers never fully adjust to the conditions, suffering from chronic sleep deprivation that affects their performance and health. Others develop the ability to sleep through anything, a skill that proves valuable during military campaigns but can be dangerous when posted to guard duty. The psychological pressure of the living situation compounds the already considerable stress of military service. There is no escape from your tent mates, no private space where you can process the day's events or simply be alone with your thoughts. Every emotion, every moment of weakness, every sign of fear or homesickness is observed and noted by 7 other men who are themselves struggling with the same challenges. This creates an environment where vulnerability is dangerous, and emotional support, when it comes at all, must be carefully disguised. Personal possessions must be minimal, not only due to space constraints, but also because of the risk of theft. Even within a contubernium, where mutual dependence should create trust, valuable items have a way of disappearing. The combination of desperation, opportunity, and the constant moral compromises required by military life creates situations where Even good men may be tempted to take what doesn't belong to them. As you settle into your first night in the tent, listening to the breathing of 7 strangers who will become your closest companions in the trials ahead, you begin to understand that the physical discomfort of your living situation is merely the beginning of your education in Roman military life. The real challenges, the ones that will determine whether you survive your term of service, are only beginning to reveal themselves in the cramped, smelly, intimate darkness of your new home. Dawn arrives not with the gentle lightening of sky that you remember from your family's farm, but with the harsh blast of the buccina, the military horn that transforms 8 sleeping men into a tangle of confusion, cursing, and desperate activity within the span of a few heartbeats. There is no gradual awakening in the contubernum, no moment to collect your thoughts or prepare mentally for the day ahead. The moment that bronze horn sounds across the camp, you must be moving, because hesitation in the Roman army is not just discouraged, it is actively dangerous. Your 7 tent mates erupt into motion around you, each man following a routine so precisely choreographed that it resembles a violent dance. Gaius, the massive Gaul who sleeps nearest the entrance, rolls to his feet and begins strapping on his armor while simultaneously kicking his equipment into position. His movements are economical and precise, the result of years spent in similar situations where speed could mean the difference between routine duty and severe punishment. You watch him while struggling with your own gear, trying to learn from his efficiency while simultaneously fighting the confusion that comes with insufficient sleep and the disorientation of waking in an unfamiliar environment. The process of getting dressed and equipped in the confines of the tent requires careful coordination among all 8 men. There simply isn't enough space for everyone to move freely at the same time, so the group has developed an unspoken choreography based on seniority and practical necessity. The veterans dress first, their experience allowing them to complete the process quickly and efficiently. The newer recruits, including yourself, wait for gaps in the activity before attempting to don their own equipment. Your armor consists of a mail shirt, the larica hamata, that weighs approximately 30 pounds and must be pulled on over your head while crouched in the limited space beneath the tent's sloping walls. The process is awkward and time-consuming, requiring careful maneuvering to avoid tangling the mail rings or catching them on the tent's interior. Veterans can accomplish this in under a minute. You require nearly 5, earning muttered curses from tent mates who must wait for you to finish before they can access their own equipment. The daily inspection that follows breakfast is an ordeal that tests both your equipment maintenance skills and your ability to present a military appearance. After a night spent sleeping on the ground with 7 other men, the centurion who conducts the inspection has eyes trained to detect the smallest flaw in equipment or appearance, and his punishment for substandard presentation is swift and painful. Your shield must be perfectly clean despite having been stored in the tent's dusty interior. Your armor must gleam despite the impossibility of proper maintenance in the confined space. Your weapons must be sharp and properly oiled despite the constant exposure to moisture and dirt. The morning meal, such as it is, must be prepared and consumed within the tent when weather conditions make outdoor cooking impossible. The process begins with grinding grain into flour using a hand mill, a laborious task that fills the tent with fine dust that settles on everything and everyone. The flour is then mixed with water to create a paste that can barely be dignified with the name of bread. This mixture is cooked on a flat pan over a small fire, the smoke from which has no proper outlet, and creates an atmosphere that stings the eyes and irritates the throat. The rations provided by the army are calculated to maintain life and basic strength, but they bear no resemblance to the varied diet that even poor civilians might enjoy. Salt pork, often rancid, from long storage, provides protein but must be soaked and boiled to remove the worst of the spoilage. Olive oil, when available, helps make the bread more palatable, but is dispensed in quantities so small that it barely coats the food. Wine, watered down to prevent intoxication, serves as the primary beverage, but often tastes more of vinegar than anything resembling the drink you remember from civilian life. The logistics of meal preparation in the tent create additional challenges beyond the basic cooking process. Water for cooking must be heated over the fire, competing for space with the food preparation. The single cooking pot must serve multiple purposes: boiling meat, cooking grain, and serving as a mixing bowl for various preparations. Cleaning. The pot between uses is often impossible, leading to meals that taste of whatever was prepared previously. The social dynamics of shared meals reveal the hierarchies and tensions within the contubernium in ways that formal military structure doesn't capture. Food distribution follows strict protocols based on seniority, but the actual process of eating in such cramped quarters creates opportunities for conflict. Accidents, spilled food, knocked over cups, burns from the cooking fire are common and can trigger arguments that escalate quickly in the confined space. Your personal hygiene routine, such as it is, must be accomplished with minimal water and no privacy. The small amount of water allocated for washing serves all 8 men, becoming progressively dirtier as it moves through the group. By the time the junior members of the contubernium have their turn, the water often resembles mud more than anything, suitable for cleaning. During active campaigns, even this minimal washing may be impossible for days or weeks at a time. The tent's interior accumulates dirt and debris at an alarming rate. 8 men tracking in mud, dust, and vegetation from outside activities, combined with the residue from cooking and equipment maintenance, creates a living environment that would be considered uninhabitable by civilian standards. The leather floor provides no insulation from ground moisture, meaning that dampness seeps up from below, while condensation from 8 men's breathing creates moisture problems from above. Personal waste management becomes a logistical challenge that affects every aspect of life in the tent. The single chamber pot must serve all 8 men, and its contents must be emptied regularly to prevent the tent from becoming uninhabitable. During siege situations or when the camp is under threat, leaving the tent for this purpose may be impossible, leading to conditions that defy description. The psychological pressure of living in such close quarters with 7 other men creates stress that compounds the already considerable challenges of military service. Every personal habit, every quirk of behavior, every sign of weakness or strength becomes known to your tent mates in intimate detail. Privacy becomes a luxury that exists only in memory, and the constant surveillance by your companions creates pressure to maintain a facade of competence and strength, even when you are struggling with fear, homesickness, or physical ailments. The evening routine reverses the morning's activities, but with the added burden of exhaustion from a full day of military activities. Equipment must be cleaned and maintained before it can be stored, a process that requires adequate light and space, both of which are in short supply within the tent. The single oil lamp that provides illumination must serve all 8 men, creating a queue for equipment maintenance that often extends late into the night. Sleep, when it finally comes, is often interrupted by the activities of tent mates who are still completing their equipment maintenance, or by the natural sounds of 8 men in close proximity. The symphony of snoring, coughing, and movement creates a background noise that some soldiers never fully adjust to. Others develop the ability to sleep through anything, though this adaptation can be dangerous when alertness is required for guard duty or emergency situations. The seasonal variations in tent life create additional challenges that test human endurance in different ways. Summer heat turns the tent into an oven, with temperatures that can become dangerous when combined with the physical demands of military service. The leather walls trap heat and moisture, creating an atmosphere that is both stifling and humid. Ventilation is minimal, and the concentration of 8 men's body heat makes the situation even worse. Winter presents the opposite challenge, with cold that penetrates the tent's minimal insulation and makes sleep difficult or impossible. The single brazier that provides heat must serve all 8 men, and fuel for it is often scarce. Frost forms on the interior walls during the coldest nights, and water containers freeze solid. The combination of cold and dampness creates conditions that promote illness, and the close quarters ensure that any sickness spreads quickly through the entire contubernium. The psychological adaptation required for tent life represents a fundamental change in how you relate to concepts of privacy, comfort, and personal space. The gradual erosion of civilian sensibilities happens so slowly that you don't notice it occurring, but after months in the tent, the idea of having a private room or sleeping alone becomes as foreign as the idea of flying. Your sense of normal gradually shifts to accommodate conditions that would have seemed impossible to endure when you first arrived. The bonds formed within the contubernium, forged by shared hardship and mutual dependence, become stronger than family relationships. In many cases, these 7 men know you better than your parents ever did, having observed you in conditions of extreme stress, vulnerability, and danger. They have seen you at your worst and your best, and their opinion of your character is based on behavior, under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The question that haunts your adjustment to this new life is whether the person you are becoming in response to these conditions bears any resemblance to the person you were before entering the tent, and whether that transformation represents growth or loss. After 2 years of sharing 3 square meters with 7 other men, you have become something different from the farmer's son who first ducked through that leather tent flap. The transformation is so complete that you no longer recognize the person you were before the contubernium claimed you. Your body has adapted to sleeping in a space where you can stretch out your arms and touch your neighbors. Your lungs have grown accustomed to air, thick with the exhalations of 8 men, and your mind has learned to find privacy in a place where privacy cannot exist. The tent has become more than shelter. It is your entire world compressed into a space smaller than most root cellars. Every square inch has been mapped by your body during restless nights. Every sound has been catalogued and assigned meaning. Every smell has been identified and accepted as part of the complex atmosphere that defines home. The leather walls that once seemed like a prison now feel like protection, the only barrier between you and a world that has grown strange and distant during your years of service. Your 7 tent mates have evolved from strangers into something closer than brothers, men who know your deepest fears, your most embarrassing weaknesses, and your greatest strengths because they have observed you in conditions where all pretense becomes impossible. Gaius, the massive Gaul who once seemed so intimidating, now snores with a distinctive pattern that you find oddly comforting. His presence near the tent entrance has become a source of security, his bulk serving as the first line of defense against whatever dangers might emerge from the darkness outside. Quintus, the former merchant whose nervous energy once irritated you, has revealed himself to be a master of the small economies that make tent life bearable. His ability to acquire extra rations, better equipment, or small luxuries through an elaborate network of trades and favors has benefited the entire contubernium. His muttering during sleep, which once kept you awake, now serves as a kind of audio barometer. When Quintus sleeps quietly, you know the day ahead will be routine. But when his dreams are troubled, experience has taught you to prepare for difficult times. Lucius, the young patrician whose refined manners seemed so out of place in the rough environment of the tent, has proven to possess a core of steel that his gentle upbringing concealed. His ability to read and write has made him valuable to the centurions, earning privileges that he shares with his tentmates. His transformation from soft civilian to hardened soldier has been particularly dramatic, and watching it has taught you something about the human capacity for adaptation that you never suspected existed. The 4 other men who complete your contubernium have each contributed their own skills, personalities, and survival strategies to the collective organism that your group has become. Marcus, a former gladiator whose scarred face tells stories of arena combat, brings a knowledge of violence that has kept the group safe during the inevitable conflicts that arise in military camps. Titus, barely older than yourself, possesses an almost supernatural ability to find food, water, and other necessities in situations where such things seem impossible to obtain. Decimus, the oldest member of your group at 35, serves as the unofficial leader whose experience with military life has guided the group through countless challenges. His knowledge of regulations, procedures, and the unwritten rules of survival has prevented disasters that could have destroyed the contubernium. Flavius, the youngest at 17, brings an energy and optimism that somehow survives even the worst conditions, providing a source of morale that has proven essential during the darkest periods of your service. The sleeping arrangements have evolved into a complex system that maximizes both comfort and security within the severe constraints of the available space. Each man's position is determined not just by seniority but by personal habits, body size, and compatibility with his neighbors. You have learned to sleep on your side with your knees drawn up, minimizing the space you occupy while still maintaining enough freedom of movement to respond quickly to alarms. The intimate knowledge of your tent mates' sleeping patterns allows you to predict their movements and adjust accordingly, creating a kind of unconscious choreography that prevents the conflicts that might otherwise arise from such close quarters. Your personal possessions have been refined down to the absolute essentials, not just by military regulations, but by the practical impossibility of storing anything unnecessary in the limited space. Every item you own serves multiple purposes. Your belt doubles as a tool for equipment maintenance, your cloak functions as bedding, ground cover, and rain protection. Your eating utensils are designed for easy cleaning and compact storage. The discipline required to maintain such minimalism has become second nature, and you find yourself unable to understand how civilians manage to accumulate the vast quantities of possessions that characterize life outside the army. The daily routines that once seemed so harsh have become comfortable rhythms that structure your existence. The morning blast of the buccina no longer startles you awake. Your body has learned to anticipate it, and you often find yourself conscious moments before the horn sounds. The rapid dressing routine that once left you confused and struggling has become automatic, your hands finding equipment in the dark without conscious thought. The evening maintenance of gear that once kept you awake late into the night now serves as a meditative activity that helps you process the day's events. Your relationship with food has undergone a fundamental transformation that reflects the broader changes in your character. The varied diet of your civilian life, fresh vegetables, meat prepared in different ways, fruits that varied with the seasons, has been replaced by a rotation of perhaps a dozen different meals, most of which would have been considered barely edible by your former self. Yet you have learned to appreciate subtle variations in preparation, to find satisfaction in the simplest improvements to basic rations, and to view food primarily as fuel rather than pleasure. The social dynamics within the tent have reached a state of equilibrium that allows 8 very different men to coexist in conditions that would drive most people to violence or madness. Arguments still occur, but they are resolved quickly through mechanisms that the group has developed organically. The strong protect the weak, the skilled teach the incompetent, and the experienced guide the newcomers through a system of mutual support that has no formal structure, but operates with the precision of a military formation. Your role within this system has evolved based on your particular strengths and the group's needs. Your farming background has given you knowledge of weather patterns, seasonal changes, and food preservation that has proven valuable during long campaigns. Your physical strength, developed through years of agricultural work, has made you useful for tasks requiring heavy lifting or endurance. Your steady temperament, tested by the patient work of tending crops, has made you a stabilizing influence during periods of tension or crisis. The psychological changes you have undergone are perhaps more profound than the physical adaptations. The concept of privacy, once so important to your sense of self, has been replaced by a comfort with constant companionship that makes solitude feel strange and uncomfortable. The need for personal space, once fundamental to your well-being, has been supplanted by a preference for the security that comes from knowing exactly where your companions are at all times. The civilian desire for comfort and luxury has been replaced by a satisfaction with functionality and efficiency that views any excess as wasteful and potentially dangerous. Your understanding of loyalty has been refined through the crucible of shared hardship into something more precise and powerful than anything you experienced in civilian life. The bonds forged in the tent are based not on shared interests or compatible personalities, but on absolute mutual dependence. You would die for any of your tent mates not because you necessarily like them all, but because their survival is essential to your own. This loyalty extends beyond emotional attachment to encompass a practical recognition that the group's strength depends on the strength of each individual member. The military skills you have developed through constant practice and life or death application have made you into a weapon more effective than any sword or spear. Your ability to coordinate with your tent mates in combat situations has been refined through countless drills and actual battles into something that resembles telepathy. You can anticipate their movements, compensate for their weaknesses, and amplify their strengths without conscious thought. The contubernium functions in combat as a single organism with 8 parts, each perfectly adapted to its role in the larger entity. The question of what you will become when your term of service ends, assuming you survive to see that day, has become increasingly difficult to answer. The person who entered the tent 2 years ago possessed skills, interests, and dreams that were suited to civilian life. The person you have become is adapted to an environment where survival depends on constant vigilance, where comfort is suspicious, and where the most important relationships are based on shared danger rather than shared pleasure. As you lie in your assigned space, listening to the familiar sounds of 7 other men sleeping around you, you sometimes wonder whether the transformation you have undergone represents a loss of humanity or a distillation of what humanity really means when everything non-essential has been stripped away. The bonds you have formed in this tent are stronger than those you knew in civilian life. The skills you have developed are more refined than anything you possessed as a farmer, and the person you have become is more capable of surviving in a hostile world than the person you were before. Yet there are aspects of your former self that you miss with an intensity that surprises you. The ability to be alone with your thoughts, the pleasure of eating food prepared for enjoyment rather than mere sustenance, the comfort of sleeping in a space designed for a single person. These luxuries have acquired a significance that they never possessed when they were available to you. The question that haunts your nights is whether the price paid for your transformation into an efficient soldier has been worth the capabilities you have gained, and whether the person who eventually leaves this tent will be able to find happiness in a world that operates according to different rules than those that govern life in the contubernium. The great iron gates of Ravenscroft Castle groan shut behind the last refugees from the surrounding villages, their echoes reverberating through the stone corridors like the sound of a tomb being sealed. You are Brother Thomas, a Benedictine monk who has spent the last 15 years in peaceful contemplation of God's Word, and until this morning your greatest hardship was the rough wool of your habit chafing against skin softened by scholarly pursuits. Now, as you watch the massive oak and iron barriers that separate you from the besieging army, you begin to understand that your previous conception of suffering was merely preparation for the education that awaits you within these walls. The castle that has become your prison is a marvel of medieval engineering designed to withstand exactly the situation you now face. Built over the course of 3 generations, Ravenscroft represents the culmination of military architecture, walls 40 feet high and 8 feet thick, constructed from massive blocks of limestone quarried from the surrounding hills. The gatehouse alone contains 3 separate portcullises, murder holes for pouring boiling oil on attackers, and chambers designed to house the equipment needed to maintain a siege defense. Yet, for all its impressive fortifications, the castle was never designed to house the 1,000 souls who now crowd its courtyards and corridors. The refugees who have sought shelter within these walls represent every level of medieval society, from minor nobles fleeing their outlying manors to serfs whose entire villages have been burned by the advancing army. Children cry constantly, their wails echoing off the stone walls in a symphony of despair that never completely fades. The elderly huddle in whatever corners they can find, many too weak to compete for the limited space available in the castle's chambers. Women clutch their possessions, what little they manage to save from homes they will never see again, while men pace restlessly, their faces bearing the hollow expression of those who have lost everything they worked their lives to build. Castle's normal population of perhaps 200 souls has swelled to over 1,000, creating conditions that strain every system designed to maintain life within the fortress. The Great Hall, which once hosted elegant feasts for the Lord and his guests, now serves as a dormitory for hundreds of people who sleep wherever they can find space. The floor is covered with straw that was fresh when the siege began, but has already begun to smell of human waste, unwashed bodies, and the lingering odors of too many people living in too small a space. Your own accommodations reflect your status as a man of learning and faith. The castle's chapel, where you conduct daily prayers for the souls of the besieged, has become your sleeping quarters, shared with 3 other clergy who arrived before the gates closed. The stone floor is cold and unforgiving, even with the thin straw mattresses that serve as your beds. The altar, consecrated to the worship of God, now doubles as storage space for the personal belongings of men who have nowhere else to keep them. The irony of seeking sanctuary in a place dedicated to peace while preparing for war is not lost on you, though you have learned to accept such contradictions as part of God's mysterious plan. The food situation, which seemed manageable when the siege began, has already begun to reveal the mathematical reality of sustained defense. The castle's stores, designed to feed 200 people for 6 months, must now sustain 5 times that number for an unknown period. The Lord Steward, a practical man named Geoffrey, who has managed the castle's resources for 20 years, has implemented strict rationing that reduces every person's daily intake to levels that maintain life but do little more. Your morning meal consists of a bowl of thin gruel made from barley, often mixed with scraps of vegetables or meat when available. The portion is measured with scientific precision, enough to provide the energy needed to perform essential tasks, but insufficient to satisfy hunger. By midday, the gnawing emptiness in your stomach has become a constant companion, and by evening, thoughts of food dominate your consciousness in ways that feel almost sinful to a man dedicated to spiritual contemplation. The communal kitchens located in the castle's lower levels have been reorganized to handle the massive increase in demand. The cooking fires burn constantly, tended by teams of women who work in shifts to prepare meals for hundreds of people. The smoke from these fires, which once dispersed easily through the castle's chimneys, now accumulates in the lower levels, creating an atmosphere that stings the eyes and irritates the lungs. The heat from the cooking fires, combined with the warmth generated by so many bodies in close proximity, has turned the castle's interior into a sweltering environment that becomes more oppressive as the siege continues. Water presents perhaps the greatest challenge to survival. The castle's well, adequate for normal operations, must now serve 10 times its intended capacity. The daily allocation of water for each person has been reduced to barely enough for drinking, with nothing left over for washing or cooking. The well itself has become a constant source of tension as people queue for hours to fill their containers with the precious liquid. Arguments break out regularly over position in line, accusations of taking more than one's fair share, and the inevitable accidents that spill water and waste this most essential resource. Personal hygiene has become impossible under the current conditions. The small amount of water available is reserved for drinking and essential cooking, leaving none for washing bodies or clothing. After only a few weeks of siege conditions, the smell of unwashed humanity has become overwhelming. Lice and other parasites spread rapidly through the crowded population, and skin diseases flourish in the unsanitary conditions. Your own body, once kept clean through regular bathing in the monastery, has begun to develop the same odors and irritations that afflict everyone else within the walls. The psychological pressure of confinement affects different people in different ways. Some, like yourself, find refuge in prayer and contemplation, using familiar spiritual practices to maintain mental stability. Others become increasingly agitated as the days pass, their anxiety manifesting in restless pacing, constant complaining, and sometimes violent outbursts that must be controlled by the castle's guards. Children, perhaps most adaptable to changing circumstances, seem to adjust more quickly than adults, though their constant hunger makes them prone to crying that adds to the general atmosphere of distress. The social hierarchy that governed life outside the castle walls has become compressed and intensified within the fortress. The lord and his immediate family still occupy the finest chambers, but even they must accept conditions that would have been unthinkable before the siege. Minor nobles find themselves sharing quarters with wealthy merchants, while common soldiers sleep alongside peasant farmers. The usual protocols of medieval society, the careful maintenance of social distance, the elaborate courtesies that governed interaction between classes, have been simplified into basic rules of survival and mutual aid. The castle's defences require constant maintenance by men who understand that their lives depend on keeping the walls intact and the gates secure. Teams work in shifts to repair damage from the besiegers' siege engines, to maintain the murder holes and arrow slits that allow defenders to attack without exposing themselves, and to ensure that the mechanisms controlling the gates and portcullises remain in working order. The physical demands of this work, combined with reduced food rations, quickly exhaust men who were already weakened by the stress of the siege situation. The daily routine within the castle has been structured around the dual necessities of survival and defense. Morning prayers, which you conduct in the chapel, serve not only spiritual needs but also practical ones. The gathering provides an opportunity to disseminate information about food distribution, work assignments, and any changes in the siege situation. The rest of the day is divided between whatever tasks each person has been assigned: cooking, cleaning, maintenance, or defense, and the long periods of waiting that characterize siege warfare. Entertainment, once an important part of castle life, has been reduced to its most basic forms. The traveling musicians, storytellers, and entertainers who once provided diversion are either trapped inside the castle or prevented from entering by the besieging army. People create their own entertainment through conversation, simple games, and the sharing of stories, but even these activities are constrained by the need to conserve energy and avoid conflicts in the crowded conditions. The nights bring their own challenges. The castle's chambers, never designed to house so many people, become stifling environments where the air grows thick with human exhalations and the sounds of hundreds of people sleeping in close proximity. Privacy becomes impossible. Every conversation is overheard, every movement observed, every personal habit exposed to the scrutiny of strangers. Sleep, when it comes, is often interrupted by the crying of children, the complaints of the uncomfortable, or the sounds of people moving about in the darkness. The psychological impact of being trapped becomes more pronounced as the siege continues. The knowledge that you cannot leave, that your fate is entirely dependent on factors beyond your control, creates a sense of helplessness that affects even the strongest individuals. Some people become obsessed with the walls themselves, spending hours staring at the stone barriers that protect them while simultaneously imprisoning them. Others develop an almost pathological fear of the space beyond the walls, imagining the besieging army as a supernatural force rather than a collection of human beings with their own limitations and vulnerabilities. The question that haunts your prayers as you kneel before the altar that has become your furniture is whether the suffering you witness around you represents a test of faith or a punishment for sins you cannot identify. The people within these walls are good Christians who have done nothing to deserve their current circumstances, yet they endure hardships that seem designed to break both body and spirit. The theological implications of their situation challenge your understanding of divine justice and force you to confront questions about the nature of suffering that your years of peaceful study never prepared you to answer. 3 months into the siege, the mathematics of survival have become as precise and unforgiving as the stone walls that surround you. Every grain of barley, every drop of water, every scrap of meat has been measured, weighed, and allocated according to calculations that reduce human need to cold numerical precision. You have learned to think of your body not as a temple of the Holy Spirit, but as a machine that requires specific amounts of fuel to continue functioning, and you have discovered that this machine can operate on far less fuel than you ever imagined possible. The morning ration that once seemed inadequate now appears generous compared to what you receive as the siege enters its 4th month. The barley gruel has been watered down to a consistency that barely qualifies as food, supplemented occasionally with whatever vegetables can be found in the castle's gardens, or whatever meat can be obtained from the animals that were brought within the walls before the siege began. The portions are measured with the precision of a goldsmith weighing precious metals, and the slightest deviation from the established ration triggers accusations of theft that can escalate into violence. Your own body has begun to adapt to the chronic malnutrition in ways that both fascinate and terrify you. The soft flesh that once covered your frame has been consumed by your body's desperate need for energy, leaving you with the lean, almost skeletal appearance that has become common among the castle's inhabitants. Your ribs are clearly visible through your skin, your face has taken on the hollow-cheeked appearance of the perpetually hungry, and your hands have developed the tremor that characterizes advanced malnutrition. The physical changes are accompanied by mental alterations that affect your ability to think clearly and maintain emotional stability. The constant hunger creates a preoccupation with food that intrudes into your prayers, your conversations, and your dreams. You find yourself fantasizing about meals you enjoyed before the siege with an intensity that feels almost sinful. The spiritual disciplines that once brought you comfort now require enormous effort to maintain, as your weakened body struggles to support the mental focus required for prayer and contemplation. The social dynamics within the castle have evolved in response to the increasingly desperate conditions. The careful rationing system has created a complex economy based on the trading of food portions, with people exchanging services or possessions for additional rations. Some individuals have emerged as food brokers, accumulating small surpluses. Through careful management and trading them for other necessities, others have become desperate enough to steal from the common stores, a crime that is punished by reduction of rations, a penalty that can be tantamount to a death sentence in the current circumstances. The children within the castle present the most heartbreaking aspect of the siege conditions. Their smaller bodies require proportionally more food than adults to maintain growth and development, yet they receive the same reduced rations as everyone else. You watch them grow progressively thinner and weaker, their games becoming less energetic as malnutrition saps their strength. Some of the youngest have already died, their small bodies unable to survive on the inadequate nutrition available. Their deaths are marked by brief ceremonies in the chapel, but the grief of their parents must be suppressed in favor of the practical considerations of survival. The elderly face different but equally severe challenges. Their weakened bodies require more care and attention than can be provided in the current circumstances, and many lack the physical strength needed to compete for resources or defend their allocated portions. You have watched several of the older refugees simply fade away, their bodies giving up the struggle to survive in conditions that would challenge much younger people. Their deaths are often welcomed as a relief from suffering, though such thoughts conflict with your religious beliefs about the sanctity of life. The castle's food stores, despite careful rationing, continue to dwindle at a rate that makes the eventual outcome of the siege mathematically certain. Geoffrey, the steward, has shared with you the calculations that show the current rations can be maintained for perhaps 2 more months, after which further reductions will be necessary. The spectre of complete starvation hangs over every decision, every allocation, every meal. The knowledge that the food will eventually run out entirely creates a desperation that affects every aspect of life within the walls. The psychological pressure of slow starvation manifests in different ways among the castle's inhabitants. Some people become obsessed with hoarding whatever small amounts of food they can accumulate, hiding scraps in their clothing or personal belongings against some imagined future need. Others develop eating disorders, either consuming their rations too quickly and suffering extended periods without food, or saving their portions until the food spoils and becomes inedible. The constant hunger affects judgment and decision-making in ways that create additional dangers in an already precarious situation. The water situation has become even more critical than the food shortage. The castle's well, adequate for normal circumstances, is showing signs of strain under the constant demand. The water level has dropped noticeably, and the quality has begun to deteriorate as the increased usage stirs up sediment from the bottom of the well. The daily allocation of water has been reduced to barely enough for drinking, with nothing available for cooking or cleaning. The lack of water for sanitation has created health problems that compound the effects of malnutrition. The medical situation within the castle has reached crisis levels as the siege continues. Brother Marcus, the physician monk who accompanied one of the refugee groups, has been overwhelmed by the health problems that accompany prolonged siege conditions. Dysentery caused by the unsanitary conditions and contaminated water has become epidemic among the castle's inhabitants. The disease weakens already malnourished bodies and creates a cycle of deteriorating health that claims lives regularly. The lack of proper sanitation has created conditions that would have been unimaginable before the siege. The castle's latrines, designed for a much smaller population, have become breeding grounds for disease. The courtyard areas have been pressed into service as additional waste disposal sites, creating an environment that threatens the health of everyone within the walls. The smell of human waste has become so pervasive that it no longer registers as unusual, though it continues to attract flies and other insects that spread disease. The psychological effects of prolonged confinement have begun to manifest in ways that threaten the social order within the castle. Some people have developed a form of madness that causes them to stare at the walls for hours as if they could will them to disappear. Others have become violent, their frustration and desperation erupting in attacks on their fellow prisoners that must be controlled by the remaining guards. The close quarters and lack of privacy have created tensions that erupt into conflicts over the smallest perceived slights or injustices. Sleep has become increasingly difficult as the siege continues. The hard floors and crowded conditions make physical rest challenging, but the psychological stress of the situation makes mental rest nearly impossible. You find yourself lying awake at night, listening to the sounds of hundreds of people breathing, crying, and moving about in the darkness. The knowledge that you may die within these walls, that your body may never receive proper burial, creates an anxiety that interferes with the sleep that your weakened body desperately needs. The religious services you conduct have evolved to address the specific needs of people facing slow death by starvation. Your sermons focus on the spiritual benefits of suffering, the promise of eternal reward for those who endure earthly hardships with faith, and the examples of saints who faced similar trials. The congregation that gathers for these services has grown smaller as people lack the energy to attend, but those who do come seem to draw genuine comfort from the familiar rituals and the hope of divine intervention. The weather has become a factor in the siege as winter approaches and the castle's interior grows colder. The reduced food intake makes everyone more susceptible to cold, and the lack of fuel for heating fires means that the stone walls provide little warmth. People huddle together for warmth, but the close contact spreads disease more quickly through the population. The combination of cold, hunger, and disease creates a deadly triangle that claims lives with increasing frequency. The economic system that has developed within the castle reflects the desperation of the inhabitants. Personal possessions that once had sentimental or practical value are traded for additional food or water. Jewelry, clothing, tools, and even religious items change hands in exchange for a few extra spoonfuls of gruel or additional cup of water. The normal concepts of value and worth have been replaced by the single measure of survival utility. The question that consumes your thoughts as you kneel in prayer before the altar is no longer whether the siege will end, but whether you will live to see its conclusion. The mathematical reality of the situation suggests that the food will run out before the besieging army gives up and withdraws. The choice facing everyone within the walls is becoming increasingly clear: surrender and face whatever fate awaits at the hands of the besiegers, or continue to endure conditions that seem designed to break both body and spirit until death provides the only escape from suffering. 6 months after the gates closed, the castle has become a monument to human endurance pushed beyond its natural limits. The mathematics of survival have reached their inevitable conclusion. The food is gone, the water is nearly exhausted, and the people within these walls have been reduced to shadows of their former selves. You weigh perhaps half what you did when the siege began, your body having consumed its own muscle and fat in a desperate attempt to sustain life. The face that looks back at you from the polished metal surface you use as a mirror resembles a skull wrapped in parchment, the eyes sunken deep into sockets that seem too large for the wasted features that surround them. The daily ration that was once measured in spoonfuls is now measured in individual grains of barley. The communal cooking fires that once provided warmth and the illusion of comfort now burn only when fuel can be found, which is increasingly rare as every piece of combustible material within the castle has been consumed. The wooden furniture, the roof timbers from abandoned buildings, even the handles of tools and weapons have been fed to the fires in an attempt to maintain some warmth in the stone chambers that have become as cold as tombs. The social order that once governed life within the castle has collapsed under the weight of absolute desperation. The careful rationing system that maintained discipline for months has broken down as people fight over scraps of food that would not have satisfied a mouse in better times. The Lord's authority, once absolute within his domain, has been reduced to the power of a man who controls nothing more than his own small portion of suffering. The guards who once maintained order have either died or become too weak to enforce discipline, leaving the strongest to prey upon the weakest in a system that resembles the law of the jungle more than civilized society. Your role as a religious leader has evolved into something you never expected when you took your vows. The spiritual comfort you once provided through familiar prayers and rituals has been replaced by the practical task of helping people prepare for death. The last rites that were once reserved for the dying are now administered to the living as people seek spiritual peace before their bodies fail entirely. The chapel where you once conducted services of thanksgiving has become a mortuary where the dead are laid out before burial in the castle's courtyard, which has been converted into a makeshift cemetery. The deaths that occur daily have taken on a terrible routine that reflects the systematic nature of starvation. The process follows a predictable pattern. First, the loss of energy and the inability to perform even simple tasks. Then the swelling of joints and extremities as the body attempts to conserve fluid, followed by the mental confusion that accompanies the final stages of malnutrition, and finally, the quiet cessation of breathing that marks the end of suffering. The bodies of the dead are carried to the courtyard with the same mechanical efficiency once used for routine maintenance tasks. The children who have survived this long represent the most heartbreaking aspect of the siege's final phase. Those who have not succumbed to disease or malnutrition have been transformed into creatures that barely resemble the laughing, playing youngsters who entered the castle months ago. Their bodies have stopped growing, their hair has fallen out in patches, and their eyes hold a hollow expression that speaks of suffering beyond their years. Some have become so weak that they can no longer walk, lying in whatever corner their parents have chosen for them, waiting for the inevitable end. The castle's water supply has been reduced to a trickle that barely suffices for the most essential needs. The well that once provided an abundance of clean water now yields only a few buckets per day of liquid that is barely fit for human consumption. The water is carefully measured and distributed according to a hierarchy that prioritizes those who might still have some chance of survival, though such decisions have become increasingly difficult to make as the number of viable survivors dwindles. The psychological effects of prolonged starvation have created a population that exists in a state between life and death. Many people have lost the ability to think clearly, their minds clouded by the effects of severe malnutrition. Others have retreated into a kind of waking unconsciousness, sitting motionless for hours at a time, their bodies conserving energy by shutting down all but the most essential functions. The conversations that once provided distraction from the hardships have dwindled to whispered exchanges between people who lack the energy for normal speech. The negotiations for surrender have begun, though they proceed with agonizing slowness as both sides recognize that the end is inevitable. The besieging army has grown impatient with the extended siege, their own supplies strained by the lengthy campaign. The castle's defenders, led by the Lord and his remaining advisors, face the terrible choice between continued resistance that can only end in death for everyone within the walls, or surrender that may result in execution for the leadership, but might spare the lives of the remaining civilians. The terms being discussed reflect the reality of medieval warfare and the customs that govern the conduct of sieges. The Lord and his knights face certain death if they surrender, as they are considered rebels against their lawful sovereign. The common people within the castle, may be spared if they submit to the authority of the besieging army, though their fate will depend on the mercy of commanders who have invested months in capturing the fortress. The clergy, including yourself, occupy a special category that might provide some protection, though the political nature of the conflict makes even religious immunity uncertain. The moral questions that arise from the siege's conclusion challenge every aspect of your religious training and personal beliefs. The decision to surrender means accepting responsibility for the deaths of those who have already died, rather than submit to the enemy. The choice to continue resistance means condemning the remaining survivors to certain death from starvation. The theological implications of these choices, questions about the nature of sacrifice, the value of individual life versus collective resistance, the role of divine providence in human suffering, have no clear answers in the religious education you received. The physical process of dying from starvation has become a familiar sight within the castle walls. The human body, deprived of adequate nutrition for months, begins to consume itself in a desperate attempt to maintain the functions necessary for life. The heart muscle weakens, the immune system fails, and the mind gradually loses its ability to process information or make decisions. Death, when it comes, is often peaceful, a quiet cessation of breathing that marks the end of suffering rather than a violent struggle against fate. The practical considerations of managing death on such a scale have overwhelmed the castle's resources and traditions. The usual customs surrounding death, the preparation of bodies, the religious ceremonies, the proper burial in consecrated ground, have been simplified to the point of non-existence. Bodies are wrapped in whatever cloth can be found and buried in shallow graves in the courtyard, marked only by crude wooden crosses that may not survive the winter. The religious rites that once provided comfort to the grieving have been reduced to brief prayers said over mass graves. The cannibalism that some had whispered about in the darkest moments of the siege has remained largely theoretical, though the temptation has been real for those driven to the edge of sanity by hunger. The social and religious taboos against consuming human flesh have proven stronger than the physical desperation, though there have been rumors of isolated incidents that were quickly suppressed. The moral collapse that such behavior would represent has been avoided, though the psychological pressure of the option's existence has added another layer of horror to the siege experience. The arrival of the surrender terms has created a final crisis that tests the remaining bonds of loyalty and community within the castle. The Lord's decision to surrender means abandoning the cause that has already claimed so many lives, while his refusal to surrender means condemning the remaining survivors to certain death. The debate over the terms takes place among men too weak to stand for extended periods, their arguments punctuated by the sound of breathing so labored that it serves as a constant reminder of their physical condition. The final prayers you conduct before the surrender are perhaps the most meaningful religious services of your entire career. The congregation consists of perhaps 50 survivors, all of whom expect to die within days, whether the surrender is accepted or not. The familiar words of the liturgy take on new meaning when spoken by people who have been reduced to the fundamental essence of human existence, the simple desire to continue breathing for another day. The promise of eternal life that forms the core of Christian faith becomes not an abstract theological concept, but an immediate practical hope for those whose earthly existence is clearly ending. The gates of Ravenscroft Castle open on a cold morning, in late winter, revealing the remnants of a population that has endured 6 months of systematic starvation. The survivors who walk through those gates bear little resemblance to the 1,000 souls who sought shelter within the walls at the beginning of the siege. The final accounting shows fewer than 50 people still alive, most of whom will require weeks or months of careful feeding to recover their health, assuming they can recover at all. The besieging army that greets the survivors shows a mixture of triumph and revulsion at the condition of those who emerge from the castle. The soldiers who have maintained the siege have endured their own hardships, but they have been fed, clothed and housed in conditions that seem luxurious compared to what the castle's inhabitants have experienced. The contrast between the two groups serves as a stark reminder of the different faces that warfare can present to those who participate in it. The question that haunts your final moments within the castle walls is whether the suffering you have witnessed and experienced has served any meaningful purpose. The strategic value of the castle has been negated by the surrender. The political goals that justified the siege have been achieved through the simple expedient of waiting for starvation to do the work that assault could not accomplish, and the human cost of the resistance has been enormous. The theological implications of such suffering challenge your understanding of divine justice and the role of faith in sustaining hope when hope seems unreasonable. As you walk through the gates that have confined you for 6 months, your legs trembling with the effort of supporting your wasted body, you carry with you the memory of those who did not survive to see this moment. The castle behind you stands as a monument to human endurance, but also as a testament to the price that such endurance can demand. The person who emerges from these walls bears little resemblance to the scholar monk who entered them, having been transformed by an experience that has redefined every assumption about the nature of survival, suffering, and the limits of human capability. The last ship of autumn disappears beyond the grey horizon, its sails swallowed by the mist that signals the approaching death of the sun. You are Bjorn Ironson, and at 25 you have survived enough Scandinavian winters to know that the months ahead will test every aspect of your endurance, your family's unity, and your community's capacity for survival. The longhouse that rises from the earth behind you, 40 feet of timber, stone and turf, represents the only barrier between your people and a darkness so complete that it will seem to devour the very concept of light. The longhouse itself is a marvel of engineering born from centuries of brutal necessity. Built into a slight depression in the earth to take advantage of natural insulation, its walls rise 8 feet above ground level, constructed from massive oak timbers that were felled and seasoned over several years before construction began. The gaps between the logs are sealed with a mixture of clay, moss, and animal hair that creates a nearly airtight barrier against the wind that will soon howl across the landscape with the fury of angry gods. The roof, perhaps the most critical element of winter survival, slopes at a steep angle designed to shed snow before its weight can collapse the structure. Layers of birch bark provide the primary waterproofing, covered by thick sods of earth that will freeze into a solid mass during the coldest months. The turf insulation, when properly maintained, can mean the difference between life and death. During the harshest periods of winter, when the temperature outside drops to levels that can freeze exposed flesh in minutes. Inside, the longhouse is divided into several distinct areas, each serving specific functions that have been refined through generations of winter survival. The central hearth, constructed from carefully selected stones that won't crack under extreme temperature changes, provides the primary source of heat and light for the entire structure. The fire pit is surrounded by a raised platform where the family gathers for meals, storytelling, and the countless small tasks that occupy the long winter evenings. The smoke from the fire rises through a hole in the roof, though much of it lingers in the upper portions of the house, creating a perpetual haze that stings the eyes and colors everything with a brownish tint. The sleeping areas are arranged. Along the walls, raised platforms covered with furs and woolen blankets that provide insulation from the cold earth below. Your sleeping space, as the eldest son, is positioned nearest the fire, while your younger brothers and sisters occupy spots further away according to age and status within the family hierarchy. The elderly members of the household, your parents and your father's aged mother, sleep in the warmest spots, their bodies no longer capable of generating enough heat to survive in the colder areas of the longhouse. The animals that share your winter quarters occupy the lower end of the structure, separated from the human living space by a low partition that allows their body heat to contribute to the overall warmth, while preventing the worst of their odors from overwhelming the air. The cattle, sheep, and goats that survived the autumn slaughter huddle together in the semi-darkness, their breathing creating additional moisture that condenses on the walls and drips steadily throughout the winter months. The constant presence of the animals creates a smell that combines manure, wet fur, and the sweet odor of fermented hay in ways that would be overwhelming to someone unaccustomed to such conditions. The storage areas contain the accumulated wealth of the growing season: barrels of grain, sides of preserved meat, wheels of cheese, and containers of fermented milk that will provide the calories needed to survive until spring. The quantities seem enormous when viewed all at once, but you have learned to calculate the mathematics of winter survival, and you know that every handful of grain must be carefully measured and rationed to ensure that the food lasts until the first crops of the new year can be harvested. The light that filters through the small windows, narrow openings covered with thin sheets of horn or bladder, provides barely enough illumination to distinguish day from night. During the winter months, when daylight may last only 3 or 4 hours, these windows become the primary connection to the outside world. The rest of the illumination comes from oil lamps and the firelight, creating a perpetual twilight that affects the mood and behavior of everyone in the longhouse in ways that become more pronounced as the season progresses. The preparation for winter begins months in advance, as every member of the family contributes to the accumulation of supplies needed for survival. The women have spent the summer and autumn spinning wool, weaving cloth, and creating the clothing and blankets that will provide insulation during the coldest months. The men have hunted, fished, and preserved meat using techniques that have been refined over generations. The children have gathered firewood, berries, and other materials that will be needed during the long confinement. The social dynamics of winter survival require careful management of relationships and resources that will be tested by months of close confinement. Your family consists of 3 generations living in the same space: your parents, yourself, and your wife Astrid, your 2 younger brothers and their families, your unmarried sister, and your elderly grandmother. 15 people, in total, ranging in age from your infant nephew to your grandmother, who has survived more than 70 winters. Each person has specific roles and responsibilities that must be maintained throughout the season, and the failure of any individual to fulfill their duties can threaten the survival of the entire group. The daily routine that governs life in the longhouse is structured around the basic necessities of survival: maintaining the fire, caring for the animals, preparing food, and performing the countless small tasks that keep a medieval household functioning. Your day begins before dawn, with the responsibility of rekindling the fire from the banked coals of the previous evening. This task requires skill and patience, as the fire must never be allowed to die completely. The process of starting a new fire from scratch in winter conditions can be lengthy and dangerous. The care of the animals requires constant attention. Throughout the winter months, the cattle, sheep, and goats must be fed and watered daily, their stalls cleaned regularly, and their health monitored for signs of disease or injury. The animals are as dependent on human care as the humans are on their warmth and eventual contribution to the food supply. The death of even one animal can significantly impact the family's chances of surviving until spring, making their welfare a constant concern. The preparation of food occupies a significant portion of each day, as the meals that sustain the family must be created from preserved ingredients using techniques that maximize nutrition while minimizing waste. The women of the household have developed sophisticated methods for preparing the same basic ingredients in different ways, providing variety that helps combat the psychological effects of eating the same foods for months at a time. The cooking process itself generates heat and provides activity that helps pass the long winter hours. The psychological challenges of winter survival may be even more difficult than the physical ones. The combination of confinement, darkness, and constant proximity to the same people creates tensions that can erupt into violence if not carefully managed. The lack of sunlight affects mood and energy levels in ways that can lead to a condition that resembles madness. The constant worry about food supplies, the health of family members, and the possibility of catastrophic events, fire, disease, or structural failure creates a background anxiety that affects every aspect of daily life. The entertainment and social activities that help pass the winter evenings are carefully structured to minimize conflict while providing necessary mental stimulation. Storytelling, in particular, serves multiple functions, preserving cultural knowledge, providing entertainment, and giving each family member a chance to contribute to the group's activities. The stories told during winter evenings often focus on themes of survival, heroism, and the triumph of human courage over natural forces, serving as both entertainment and inspiration for those facing their own survival challenges. The craft and skills that are practiced during the winter months serve practical purposes while providing productive activities that help combat boredom and depression. The women continue their textile work, creating and repairing clothing and household items. The men work on tools, weapons, and equipment that will be needed for the next growing season. Even the children have tasks appropriate to their age and abilities, contributing to the family's survival while learning the skills they will need as adults. The question that haunts the long winter nights as you lie, listening to the wind howling outside the walls and the breathing of 14 other people sharing your living space is whether the preparations you have made will prove adequate for the challenges that lie ahead. The winter has barely begun, and already the cold has reached levels that make even brief excursions outside dangerous. The food supplies, carefully calculated and rationed, must last for months that seem to stretch endlessly into an uncertain future. The social harmony that keeps the family functioning is under constant strain from the pressures of confinement, scarcity, and the psychological effects of prolonged darkness. The night sounds of the longhouse create a symphony of survival. The crackling of the fire, the breathing of sleeping people, the movement of animals in their stalls, the settling of timber as it contracts in the cold. These sounds provide a constant reminder that life continues despite the hostile environment outside, but they also emphasize the fragility of the barrier between survival and disaster. The longhouse represents safety and shelter, but it also represents a trap from which there is no escape until the spring sun returns to melt the snow and ice that will soon lock the landscape in their frozen grip. 2 months into the winter, the sun has become a memory so distant that it might belong to another lifetime. The pale disk that briefly appears above the southern horizon for a few hours each day provides no warmth and barely enough light to cast shadows, serving more as a reminder of what has been lost than a promise of what might return. You have learned to mark the passage of time not by the sun's movement but by the gradual consumption of stored supplies, the accumulation of animal waste that must be removed from the longhouse, and the subtle changes in your family members' faces as the prolonged darkness begins to extract its psychological toll. The longhouse that seemed spacious and well-designed during the autumn months has revealed itself to be a carefully calculated compromise between protection and imprisonment. 15 people living in a space roughly the size of a modern apartment creates conditions that would be challenging under any circumstances, but the addition of perpetual darkness, bitter cold, and the knowledge that leaving the structure means almost certain death transforms daily life into an exercise in survival psychology that tests every aspect of human adaptability. The cold outside has reached levels that redefine your understanding of what the human body can endure. The temperature regularly drops to levels where exposed skin freezes within minutes, where breath crystallizes instantly in the air, and where the very act of breathing becomes painful as the frigid air sears your lungs. The walls of the longhouse, thick as they are, cannot completely block the penetration of such extreme cold. Frost forms on the interior surfaces during the coldest nights, and the water containers placed too far from the fire freeze solid despite being inside the heated structure. The central fire has become the focal point of existence, the heart around which all life in the longhouse revolves. Maintaining the fire requires constant attention and careful management of fuel supplies that must last through months of winter. The wood that seemed so abundant during the autumn preparation now appears finite and precious, each log representing hours of warmth and light that cannot be replaced until spring allows for the collection of new fuel. The family has developed a rotation system for fire-tending duties, ensuring that someone is always awake to maintain the flames and add fuel as needed. The smoke from the fire, which was merely an annoyance during the early weeks of winter, has become a serious health hazard as the prolonged confinement continues. The longhouse fills with a thick, acrid haze that stings the eyes, irritates the throat, and creates respiratory problems for the youngest and oldest members of the family. Your grandmother, now in her 70s, has developed a persistent cough that worsens each day, and your infant nephew struggles to breathe in the smoke-filled atmosphere. The choice between adequate heating and breathable air has become a daily calculation that affects everyone's health and comfort. The food situation, carefully planned and rationed, has begun to reveal the harsh mathematics of winter survival. The stores that seemed adequate during the planning phase now appear insufficient when measured against the actual consumption patterns of 15 people confined to a small space. The daily rations have been reduced twice since the beginning of winter, and the meals that once provided satisfaction now serve only to maintain life. The constant hunger has become a background sensation that affects mood, energy levels, and decision-making ability throughout the household. The preservation techniques that allowed the family to accumulate winter supplies have proven less reliable than hoped. Some of the stored grain has developed mold despite careful preparation, forcing the disposal of precious food resources. The fermented milk has begun to spoil, creating a putrid smell that adds to the already overwhelming atmosphere. Within the longhouse, the dried meat, while still edible, has become so hard that it requires lengthy preparation to make it chewable, consuming valuable fuel in the cooking process. The animals that share the longhouse provide essential warmth and will eventually provide food, but their presence creates problems that compound the challenges of winter survival. The cattle, sheep, and goats produce significant amounts of waste that must be managed in the confined space. The smell of manure, urine, and wet animal fur has become so pervasive that it penetrates clothing, hair, and even seems to seep into the walls themselves. The animal's breathing adds moisture to the air, creating condensation problems that promote mold growth and structural damage. The water situation has become increasingly critical as the winter progresses. The natural sources of water, streams, ponds, and wells, have frozen solid, making it necessary to melt snow for drinking and cooking. The process of melting snow requires significant amounts of fuel and produces water that must be carefully filtered to remove debris and impurities. The daily water needs of 15 people and their animals represent a constant drain on fuel resources that are already stretched thin. Personal hygiene has become impossible under the current conditions. The small amount of water available is reserved for drinking and essential cooking, leaving none for washing bodies or clothing. After 2 months of confinement, the smell of unwashed humanity has become overwhelming. Lice and other parasites have spread throughout the household, and skin diseases flourish in the unsanitary conditions. The lack of cleanliness creates health problems that weaken people already stressed by poor nutrition and psychological pressure. The social tensions within the longhouse have reached levels that threaten the family's ability to function as a cooperative unit. The prolonged confinement has magnified every personality conflict, every disagreement over resources, and every difference in opinion about household management. Arguments that would have been minor disputes in normal circumstances become major conflicts when there is no escape from the people involved. The family hierarchy that maintained order during better times has begun to break down under the pressure of shared hardship. The psychological effects of prolonged darkness and confinement have begun to manifest in ways that concern you as the family's leader. Several family members have developed symptoms that resemble madness, staring at walls for hours, muttering to themselves, and showing signs of the deep melancholy that can lead to complete withdrawal from life. Your younger brother Eric has become increasingly agitated and violent, while your sister Ingrid has retreated into a silence that seems to grow deeper each day. The changes in behavior threaten the social harmony that is essential for survival. Sleep has become increasingly difficult as the winter progresses. The combination of cold, discomfort, and psychological stress makes restful sleep almost impossible. The sounds of 14 other people sleeping, breathing, and moving in the darkness create a constant background noise that interferes with rest. The smell of unwashed bodies, animal waste, and stale air makes the sleeping areas unpleasant places to spend time. The lack of adequate sleep affects judgment, mood, and physical health throughout the household. The daily routine that once provided structure and purpose has become a series of mechanical actions performed without enthusiasm or energy. The tasks necessary for survival, maintaining the fire, caring for animals, preparing food, continue to be accomplished, but the spirit that once animated these activities has been eroded by the grinding monotony of winter confinement. The family members go through the motions of living while seeming to have lost connection to the reasons for continuing the struggle. The stories and entertainment that once provided relief from the hardships of winter survival have been reduced to desperate attempts to maintain sanity in an environment that seems designed to break the human spirit. The traditional tales of heroes and adventure now seem to mock the current reality of powerlessness and confinement. The songs and music that once brought joy to winter evenings have been replaced by the sounds of coughing, crying, and the constant worry about whether the family will survive until spring. The inventory of remaining supplies has become a daily obsession that affects every decision made within the longhouse. The grain stores are diminishing at a rate that suggests they may not last through the remaining months of winter. The preserved meat is showing signs of spoilage that will soon make it inedible. The fuel supplies are being consumed faster than anticipated, raising the specter of losing the fire that represents the difference between life and death in the current conditions. The health of family members has become a constant concern as the effects of malnutrition, poor sanitation, and psychological stress accumulate over time. Your grandmother's cough has worsened to the point where she can barely speak, and your infant nephew has developed a fever that may indicate serious illness. The lack of adequate nutrition has weakened everyone's immune system, making the entire family vulnerable to diseases that would have been minor inconveniences under normal circumstances. The question that dominates your thoughts as you lie awake, listening to the wind howling outside, is whether the family possesses the physical and psychological resources needed to survive the remaining months of winter. The challenges that seemed manageable during the planning phase have proven more severe than anticipated, and the reserves of food, fuel, and human endurance are being depleted at an alarming rate. The longhouse that once represented security and shelter now feels like a trap from which there may be no escape, and the approaching months of continued darkness and cold seem to stretch endlessly toward an uncertain future. 4 months into the winter. The longhouse has become a crucible that has burned away everything non-essential about human existence, leaving only the raw elements of survival and the fundamental question of whether the bonds that hold your family together are stronger than the forces that seek to tear them apart. The person you were before this winter, the confident farmer and family leader who planned confidently for the cold months ahead, has been replaced by someone harder, more desperate and capable of decisions that would have horrified your former self. The cold outside has reached levels that seem to mock the very concept of warmth. The walls of the longhouse, despite their careful construction, now permit the penetration of a cold so intense that it creates zones within the structure where life cannot be sustained. The areas farthest from the central fire have become uninhabitable, forcing the family to crowd into an ever smaller space around the hearth. Even there, the cold creeps in through gaps in the construction, creating drafts that can extinguish oil lamps and frost that forms on interior surfaces despite the presence of the fire. The fire itself has become a jealous god that demands constant sacrifice and attention. The wood supplies, carefully calculated to last through the winter, are being consumed at a rate that makes their eventual exhaustion a mathematical certainty. Desperate measures have been taken to extend the fuel supply. Furniture has been broken up and burned, tools have been sacrificed to the flames, and even structural elements of the longhouse have been considered as potential fuel sources. The decision of what to burn next has become a daily crisis that affects every aspect of family life. The food situation has deteriorated to the point where the word meal no longer accurately describes what the family consumes. The daily rations have been reduced to quantities that maintain life but provide no satisfaction or energy for anything beyond the most essential activities. The grain that forms the staple of their diet has been stretched by mixing it with substances that would not normally be considered food, ground bark, dried moss, and even leather boiled until it becomes barely digestible. The preserved meat has been rationed to the point where each person receives perhaps one small piece per week. The mathematics of survival have become brutally clear. The remaining food supplies, even with the most careful rationing, will not last until spring. The family faces the prospect of slow starvation over the remaining months of winter, with the weakest members likely to die first. The knowledge of this inevitability affects every decision and every interaction within the longhouse, creating a desperation that transforms formerly loving relationships into calculations of survival utility. The animals that share the longhouse have become both blessing and curse. Their body heat continues to provide warmth that is essential for survival, but their food requirements compete with human needs for the dwindling supplies. The difficult decision has been made to slaughter some of the animals early, providing immediate food at the cost of future warmth and breeding stock for the spring. The process of butchering animals within the confined space of the longhouse creates additional challenges: the smell of blood and fresh meat, the practical difficulties of processing carcasses, and the psychological impact of killing animals that have been companions throughout the winter. The health crisis within the longhouse has reached levels that threaten the survival of multiple family members. Your grandmother's respiratory illness has progressed to the point where she can no longer participate in household activities and requires constant care. Your infant nephew's fever has worsened, and his constant crying adds to the stress and tension within the confined space. Several other family members have developed symptoms of malnutrition, swollen joints, skin problems, and a lethargy that makes even simple tasks difficult to complete. The psychological breakdown that you have watched developing over the past months has reached a crisis point. Your brother Eric's mental state has deteriorated to the point where he has become violent and unpredictable, threatening other family members and disrupting the cooperative activities necessary for survival. Your sister Ingrid has retreated so far into herself that she no longer responds to attempts at communication, sitting motionless for hours, staring at the fire. The stress of leadership has pushed you to the edge of your own psychological limits, and you find yourself capable of thoughts and actions that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The social structure that once governed family relationships has broken down under the pressure of survival necessity. The respect and affection that once characterized interactions between family members has been replaced by a hierarchy based purely on survival utility. Those who can contribute to the family's survival receive larger food rations and better sleeping positions, while those who have become burdens are quietly neglected. The elderly and sick, once honored and cared for, now represent mouths to feed rather than wisdom to be respected. The daily routine has been stripped down to the absolute essentials of survival. Maintaining the fire, rationing food, caring for the sick, and managing the animal population consume all available energy and attention. The crafts, entertainment, and social activities that once made winter confinement bearable have been abandoned in favor of activities that contribute directly to survival. The family members who are still capable of work perform their tasks with mechanical efficiency, but without the spirit that once animated their efforts. The decision-making process within the family has become increasingly difficult as the choices become more stark and the consequences more severe. The question of whether to continue feeding the sick and elderly, who consume precious resources but cannot contribute to survival activities, represents a moral crisis that challenges every aspect of traditional family values. The choice between slaughtering the remaining animals for immediate food or keeping them alive for warmth and future breeding stock forces calculations that reduce life to mathematical equations. The water situation has become critical as the winter progresses and fuel becomes scarce. The process of melting snow for drinking water requires significant amounts of fuel that are needed for heating, creating a competition between hydration and warmth that affects every aspect of daily life. The quality of water produced by melting snow is poor, and the limited quantity available means that many essential activities, cooking, cleaning, and basic hygiene, must be performed with inadequate amounts of this precious resource. The structural integrity of the longhouse has begun to deteriorate under the combined effects of extreme cold, moisture from condensation, and the modifications made to provide additional fuel for the fire. The roof has developed leaks that allow snow to enter the living space, creating wet areas that freeze and thaw in response to the fire's heat. The walls have developed cracks that permit cold air to enter, reducing the effectiveness of the heating system and creating additional hazards for the inhabitants. The inventory of remaining supplies has become an obsession that dominates every waking moment. The grain stores are nearly exhausted, with perhaps 2 weeks of reduced rations remaining. The preserved meat is showing signs of advanced spoilage, and much of it will soon become inedible. The fuel supplies are at critically low levels, with perhaps enough wood remaining to maintain the fire for another week if used carefully. The various tools, utensils, and equipment that make survival possible are being sacrificed to the fire, reducing the family's ability to perform essential tasks. The psychological preparation for death has become a necessary part of daily life. Within the longhouse, the family members have begun to discuss openly which of them are most likely to die first, and what arrangements should be made for their bodies. The traditional funeral rites that would normally be performed cannot be accomplished under current conditions, and the prospect of sharing living space with the bodies of dead family members creates additional stress and health hazards. The question of whether to abandon the longhouse and attempt to travel to another settlement has been raised repeatedly, though the practical impossibility of such a journey in current conditions makes it largely theoretical. The snow outside is measured in feet rather than inches. The temperature would kill exposed humans within minutes, and the family lacks the equipment and strength needed for winter travel. The longhouse represents both prison and sanctuary, trapping the family in conditions that seem designed to break their will to survive, while simultaneously providing the only protection available from certain death. The bonds of family loyalty that have held the group together through months of hardship are being tested by decisions that force members to choose between their own survival and the welfare of their relatives. The traditional values of care for the elderly, protection of the weak, and shared sacrifice for the common good are being challenged by the mathematical reality of limited resources and the approaching certainty of death. The family that entered the winter as a cohesive unit may not survive as such, even if some of its members live to see the spring. The final months of winter stretch ahead like a sentence of death, with the knowledge that current conditions cannot be sustained indefinitely. The sun, when it briefly appears, provides no warmth and serves only as a reminder of how far the family has fallen from the relative comfort of autumn. The spring that once seemed like a guaranteed future now appears as a distant possibility that may not arrive in time to save those who have invested everything in the hope of survival. The longhouse that was built as a shelter against winter's fury has become a stage for the final act of a drama that will determine whether the bonds of family can survive the ultimate test of human endurance.